so let me just say, getting married these days, it feels a lot different than it did for like our dads, you know?
Yeah, it's like the playbook got rewritten.
Yeah. Nobody told us.
Yeah, nobody told us girls.
Exactly. There's a lot of anxiety out there for men about what marriage even means today. You know what I mean?
Totally. And that's what makes this book we're diving into today, The Warrior's Guide to Modern Marriage by Conrad Riker. So interesting.
It really seems to hit a nerve with a lot of guys,
Yeah, for sure.
especially guys who are maybe a little skeptical of marriage in the first place.
Or guy, the kind of guys who are like, is this whole thing even rigged for us?
Yeah, exactly. Like, is it even a fair deal anymore?
Exactly. And Riker tackles that head on.
Okay, so how does he do that?
Well, he starts by taking us way back in time to show us how marriage has evolved over the century.
Okay, interesting.
Like, it's not this static thing, right? It's been changing for, forever.
So let's rewind the clock then. What does he say about how things used to be?
Well, he paints this picture of, these traditional patriarchal structures where the roles were super clearly defined.
Like the classic kind of 1950s Leave It to Beaver kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Think back even further to like the 1800s, the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Men were the breadwinners working in the factories. Women were managing the household.
Yeah, very separate spheres.
Exactly right. And that was the norm for a long time.
So when did things start to shift then?
Well, Riker argues that it's been a gradual process, and he points to things like the women's rights movement.
Right, obviously a huge turning point.
Hugely important for equality, of course, but he also introduces this concept of what he calls gynocentrism.
Okay, I've heard that term before.
Yeah, it gets thrown around a lot.
What does it actually mean in this context?
Essentially, it's the idea that society has become so focused on women's needs and perspectives that men's concerns kind of get pushed to the side. It's not about saying women's rights are bad or anything like that. It's more about recognizing that this shift has had, some unintended consequences.
It's like for men in marriage.
Exactly.
So it's like the pendulum swung from one extreme to the other.
That's a good way to put it. And Riker argues that this has created this legal and social environment where men often feel, advantaged. Yeah, even trapped.
Yeah, which brings us to what he calls the legal minefield, right?
Exactly. The part of marriage that probably scares guys the most.
Yeah, for sure.
And he doesn't sugarcoat it.
Oh, really?
No, he throws out some pretty shocking statistics.
Like what?
Men paying alimony in 90% of cases, women getting sole custody in 80% of cases.
Wow.
He argues that the legal system is often biased against men, particularly when it comes to divorce.
And what about prenuptial agreements? Aren't those supposed to protect you?
He addresses that too. He says prenups can offer some protection, but they're not always ironclad.
Right.
It can be difficult to enforce. And he even shares this crazy story from a legal journal, Family Law Quarterly, about this guy named Sam, who was like this brilliant engineer, but ended up getting completely screwed over in his divorce despite having a prenup.
Oof, that's a cautionary tale if I've ever heard one.
It is, and it highlights why so many men are turning to philosophies like the red pill to try and understand the modern dating landscape.
Yeah, the red pill gets a lot of attention, but can you break it down for those who might not be totally familiar with it?
Sure. At its core, the red pill philosophy encourages men to view relationships through like an evolutionary lens.
Okay.
To understand the biological and social forces that are at play in the sexual marketplace.
So it's about recognizing that there are these certain patterns in how men and women interact, and that like ignoring those patterns can lead to problems.
Exactly. And one of the things that Riker focuses on is this concept of last minute resistance, or LMR.
Okay, I've definitely experienced that.
It's confusing, right?
Super confused.
And the red pill interpretation is that it's often a test of a man's resolve, his dominance.
So it's not about like being a jerk. It's more about understanding the unspoken rules of the game.
That's a good way to put it. And it's not just about dating either. Riker also talks about how these red pill concepts apply to marriage itself.
Oh, interesting.
And how men can use this understanding to build, stronger, more fulfilling relationships.
Okay, so he's not just saying avoid marriage at all costs. He's actually trying to give guys a framework for making it work.
Exactly. He's saying, hey, if you're going to do this, you've got to be smart about it.
Right.
You've got to understand the game you're playing.
I like that. All right, so we're starting to see how Riker connects these broader societal trends to these specific challenges that men face in marriage.
Yeah, and in the next part, we're going to dig deeper into his advice for how to navigate those challenges.
Okay, can't wait to hear it.
And one of the big things is this idea of the covert contract.
Oh yeah, the covert contract. What is that exactly?
It's basically all those like unspoken expectations that you and your partner bring into the marriage. It's not the stuff you talk about openly, but it can really mess things up if you're not on the same page.
Like maybe one person assumes they'll handle the finances and the other person thinks they're going to be a stay-at-home parent, but they never actually talked about it.
Zach, or like one person's thinking we're going to have date nights every week, and the other person's like, nah, just want to chill on the couch and watch Netflix.
Right, right. Those unspoken expectations can definitely lead to some problems down the line.
Big time. So Riker's advice is to be super upfront about all this stuff.
Okay, easier said than done, though, right?
Well, yeah, but he stresses the importance of, really deep communication.
Not just like, how was your day, honey, kind of stuff.
No, like digging deep, understanding each other's needs, expectations, even fears about marriage.
He talks about understanding a woman's triggers and buttons, right?
Yeah, and that's where some people might get a little uncomfortable.
Right.
They might think it sounds manipulative.
Yeah, like you're trying to control her or something.
Right. But Riker's not saying that at all. He's saying it's about empathy and understanding.
It's like if you know that certain topics are going to upset your partner, you can avoid bringing them up in a way that's going to cause a fight.
Exactly. It's about being sensitive and approaching those conversations with care.
Okay, that makes sense. What about setting boundaries, though? How do you do that without seeming like you don't care?
It's all about communication and respect. You have to be willing to express your needs, but also be open to hearing your partner's side of things.
So it's like a two-way street.
Exactly. And Riker gives some specific tips for how to do this.
Oh, like what?
Like using I statements to express your feelings, focusing on specific behaviors instead of making generalization, avoiding accusatory language, stuff like that.
So it's about being assertive but not aggressive.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. But what happens when conflict does inevitably arise?
Well, Riker has this whole section on conflict resolution, and it's kind of like he's preparing you for battle.
He does use a lot of military metaphors.
He does right. He stresses the importance of staying calm, avoiding escalation.
Don't let things spiral out of control.
Right. And focusing on solutions instead of just blaming each other.
So it's more about working together to fix the problem.
Exactly.
Makes sense. So we've talked about communication, conflict resolution, and navigating, some of those tricky gender dynamics. But what about the more intimate aspects of marriage?
Well, Riker definitely doesn't shy away from those topics.
Okay.
In fact, he has a whole chapter on the sexual marketplace and how it impacts marriage.
Interesting that he uses that term, sexual marketplace. It kind of sounds a little cold.
It does, right?
Yeah.
But I think he's trying to get men to see relationships through a more objective lens.
To understand the dynamics that are at play.
Right. Like he's coming from that red pill perspective.
Okay, so the idea that men and women are competing for mates, and there are certain strategies that can increase your chances of success.
Exactly. He talks about the importance of understanding what women find attractive.
Okay, so like physically and behaviorally.
Yeah, both. And how men can improve their own market value, so to speak.
He talks about confidence, assertiveness, ambition, those kinds of things.
Right. And also taking care of your appearance, being financially stable, having a sense of purpose.
It's not just about looks, it's about the whole package.
Exactly. And he stresses that this isn't about manipulating women or being someone you're not. It's about becoming the best version of yourself.
Okay, I can get behind that.
Yeah.
But how does this all relate to marriage? Aren't you already off the market once you're married?
That's what a lot of people think. But Riker argues that the sexual marketplace doesn't just disappear because you put a ring on it.
So
Yeah.
you still need to be putting in the effort to be attractive to your partner.
Absolutely. He talks about maintaining physical intimacy, keeping the romance alive, and continuing to grow and evolve as individuals.
To avoid getting complacent.
Exactly. Relationships take work.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But it also kind of makes marriage sound like a burden.
Well, I think Riker would argue that it's a worthwhile burden. He sees marriage as a partnership, a journey that you embark on with someone who challenges you, supports you, helps you become the best version of yourself.
So it's not about giving up your freedom. It's about finding someone who enhances your life.
Exactly. And that's why he emphasizes choosing the right partner.
Someone who shares your values, respects you, is willing to put in the work.
Right. And that's where the whole covert contract thing comes back in. You got to make sure you're on the same page about the big stuff.
Like finances, kids, lifestyle choices.
Exactly. And shared values too.
Right. Like if one person's super religious and the other person's an atheist, that's probably going to cause some tension down the road.
Right. So he encourages couples to have those tough conversations early on.
To make sure they're really compatible.
Exactly. And all of this ties back into that idea of being a warrior in your marriage.
Right. Being proactive, intentional, willing to fight for your relationship.
Exactly. It's not about being domineering, but about having the strength to overcome challenges.
Okay, so we've covered communication, conflict resolution, the sexual marketplace, and choosing the right partner. But there's one big piece we haven't talked about yet.
Fatherhood.
Right. What does Riker have to say about being a dad in the context of modern marriage?
He's super passionate about fatherhood.
Oh yeah, definitely seems like it.
He believes that fathers are like absolutely essential, to a child's development and their well-being. He's really critical of the way the legal system often kind of pushes fathers to the side.
Right, especially when it comes to divorce and custody.
Exactly.
There's definitely that sense out there that the courts tend to favor mothers, even when it's not really, what's best for the kid.
Yeah. And Riker argues that this bias against fathers, it's not just harmful to men, it's harmful to the kids too.
Makes sense.
He cites all these studies showing that children who have involved fathers in their lives, they tend to do better in school. They have fewer behavioral problems. They have better social skills,
Right, like kids need both parents.
Absolutely. And Riker encourages fathers to be proactive, to fight for their rights, to stay involved in their kids' lives, even when it's tough.
Even when it feels like the system's working against you.
Exact. And he tells these really inspiring stories about fathers who have done just that.
Oh, yeah, like what?
Men who've overcome huge obstacles to be amazing dads.
To really step up.
Yeah, and it highlights this point that being a father, it's not just about biology,
It's about being there.
It's about commitment, it's about love, it's about putting your child's needs first.
It's about being the warrior your child needs.
Exactly.
Just like Riker talks about being a warrior in your marriage.
Right, there's a strong connection there.
Yeah, I see.
Between being a warrior husband and a warrior father.
Both require that strength, that resilience, that willingness to fight for what's right.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about the evolution of marriage, the challenges men face, the importance of communication, conflict resolution, the whole sexual marketplace thing, and of course the vital role of fatherhood.
Yeah, that's a lot.
What would you say are the biggest takeaways from The Warrior's Guide to Modern Marriage? What does Riker ultimately want men to understand?
I think his main message is that marriage can be amazing, incredibly rewarding, but it takes work.
Yeah, for sure.
It takes being intentional, and it takes being willing to adapt, because the world of relationships is constantly changing.
Right, and he's not sugarcoating anything either.
No, he's very upfront about the risks.
About the potential for things to go wrong.
Yeah, but he also gives a lot of practical advice.
Right.
He talks about choosing the right partner, understanding that covert contract mastering, communication,
Navigating the legal system.
all that stuff.
And he doesn't shy away from those more controversial topics either.
Like the sexual marketplace.
Or the power dynamics between men and women.
Right. He's not afraid to challenge the status quo.
And I think that's what makes this book so interesting,
isn't it?
He's making us think critically about marriage.
And to approach it with our eyes wide open.
And he's reminding us that men have a really important role to play in shaping the future of marriage.
Both as husbands and as fathers.
Exactly. So for our listeners who are intrigued by this book and want to learn more, where can they find it?
It's called The Warrior's Guide to Modern Marriage by Conrad Riker, and you can find it on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
Awesome. Well, I think this has been a really fascinating deep dive.
I agree.
It's given us a lot to think about.
Definitely.
And you know what? It's important to remember that you're not alone in this.
There are resources out there, communities that understand.
People who are going through the same thing.
Exact.
Yeah.
So keep learning, keep growing, and keep fighting for the kind of marriage you deserve.
Great advice.
All right, that's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us.